Of my life? Hi, so we have a ball to attend tonight. I thought it would be perfect to prep my face and to film it so I could share it with you. I normally get a lot of compliments for my everyday look, and that's just concealer, highlighter, brows, blush, and bronzer. So this is just taking it one step further. It's not my full beat. I didn't feel like wearing my full beat today. And plus my dress is really bright, so I didn't want it to be competing with my dress, but I wanted to still not wash out from my dress. I like to apply my face products onto a brush first and then blend it out with a beauty blender, just because I find that number one, it's more hygienic. Number two, I keep more product to apply to my face. And then number three, my beauty blender tends to absorb a lot of stuff. So this keeps me, number one, from having any sort of breakouts, but then number two, maximizing the product that I'm using. This past year, I really played around with where I put my blush, highlighter, and bronzer. So you'll see here that I actually place my blush pretty high up on my cheekbone, and then I go over it later with a highlighter, and I find that that's the best way for me to kind of thin out my face a little bit. And then when I go in with bronzer, I don't go into that contour, that cheekbone part of my cheek, because my bronzer is actually neutral to warm, and it looks really weird to put something warm in a place where a shadow should be. That's the difference between a bronzer and a contour shade. And sometimes bronzers can run a little bit more cool to neutral. I just don't prefer that on myself, especially for everyday. Most of my makeup is pretty versatile for everyday wear, and I just go in a little bit more if I have some sort of special event. Next, we're moving into the powder products. And I tend to put the cream down first and then the powder products for special events, because I have combination oily skin and I have hyperhidrosis on top of that, which means that when I sweat like 10 times more than the average person. And this can leave me really oily, really streaky, and I don't want that. So especially for special events, I like to double up and do stick blush, stick bronzer, and then go over that with the powder version. Now for one of my favorite parts, the eyeshadow. And this can be really complicated and tricky when you have hooded eyes like me, or if you have monolids. And you don't have to be Asian to have those type of eyelids, and I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions. So I'm going to start off with putting down a primer, which is a more drier foundation. I find that this works best for me. I also have really oily eyelids, so that makes things complicated. And then I move into putting down a powder shade all over my lid just to make blending a little bit easier. I do have a lot of drugstore items because I'm a drugstore junkie, and sometimes that can make blending difficult. So I want to go in and make sure that I make it as easy for myself as possible. And then whatever leftover dry foundation I have, I put it over my blemishes. That really keeps things from moving around and my skin from absorbing and showing the blemish even more. We don't want that. So now we're applying a small contour shade that's about a couple shades darker from my skin tone into my socket. Your socket and your crease are two different places, and that's one of the biggest misconceptions in eyeshadow. So especially if you have a puffy hooded eye like me, you kind of have to feel around to find where that socket is, and then put that contour into that area. This will help pull back the puffiness and really pull out different areas that you want. This way you have more structure and more definition in your eyes, which is something that I need. Now you can apply your eyeshadow any way you'd like for what flatters your eye shape the best. I tend to wing out my shadow a little bit, and then I actually pull my shadow into that hollow area right next to my eyebrow, and this really helps open my eye. I have really tiny eyes, and so I have to make use of the real estate I do have. Now when it comes to your deepest eyeshadow, you really have to make sure you be careful with that if you have smaller eyes, and especially if you have hooded eyes. So you want to place your color where you can actually see it when you look straight on, and you also don't want to take your darkest shade any further than a third across from the outside of your eye, if that makes any sense. And this will keep your eyes open but also give you that definition you want. And something really important that I learned, especially with all this hood that I have on my eyes is the higher you bring your shadow, the more dramatic your look is, and the lower you bring it down, the more wearable it is. So wherever you fall on that spectrum, just follow what works best for you. And now for brows, probably the bane of my existence. And of course, because I'm filming, I have a hard time with my trouble brow. So if you're anything like me, your brows are more like cousins than sisters. And there's one side that's super defined, hardly needs any work, and the other side is not hardly defined at all. And it takes a lot of patience and technique to really give it some definition and some interest, because otherwise it washes out compared to the other brow. So as you see, I am going in and just slowly building up what I need, because brows especially is something that if you wreck up, your whole face is wrecked. And that's something that my friend used to say all the time. So take your time and learn how to do them well, and you'll be able to do them quickly. So if you have really straight, arrow, and fine lashes like me, be sure that you pull off as much of the mascara off the one as you can, so you don't keep weighing those lashes down. And this makes some of the biggest changes in the shape and the awakeness of your face.
Of my life?